The Broad Perspective Network is not responsible for the content of the following program.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Broad Perspective on the Broad Perspective Network. We're glad you're with us today. I'm Vivian Kamori.
And I'm Laura Felice.
And we are joined by a very special guest today, a woman by the name of Linda Olson. And she has a new book. This is the fourth of her books. And it is called Your Story Matters, with a byline of 3 breakthrough secrets to stories that transform. Welcome, Linda. We're glad you're with us.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited to join you today.
Well, you know what? This book was quite interesting because I have some people in my family, my father being the main one, is such a good storyteller. And I've always said to myself, I wished I would follow him around with a tape recorder or a pen and paper. And now that he's in his 80s, I feel like I'm maybe starting this too late, but he still tells stories. But that's what's so endearing about him. And that's how I learned so much about my family's history, is through these stories. And you have this book that really outlines the importance of it and the significance of it and how we can improve our stories. So I think it's great. And welcome. Tell us why you chose to take on this subject.
Well, that itself is a long story. My personal story began way back when I was 14 years of age, and through a tragedy on the farm, through a tractor accident, my little 2-year-old brother was killed, and I was the one driving the tractor.
Oh, boy.
Well, that journey was 45 years to complete healing. And I knew when I had come to complete healing, I knew I needed to write my book, which is actually my 3rd book. And then when I finished my book, I looked around and I thought, you know what? If I've got a story, so does everybody else. And my next question was, if I've got a story and everybody else has a story, then why are we not telling our stories every day?
True.
And as I did some research, I discovered the number one reason is because most people don't think they have a story, and nothing could be farther from the truth. So at that point, I knew my new mission was to help people find and tell and perhaps even write their stories. And that's my new mission, and Your Story Matters is part of that mission.
I think that we are our stories. We are our stories, because you'll hear people that use the same story over and over and over, something that defines them, and sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's not, and sometimes we keep our stories bottled up inside. But I do think our stories really define who we are, and I think that anyone who is trying to connect with another individual, if they just listen hard enough, they'll get a real clear picture of who that person is by the stories they tell.
Exactly.
And sometimes they're negative stories that people get locked into, and sometimes they're real positive stories. Sometimes they're funny stories. Sometimes they're just stories. But they all are part of defining who we are. So I think that a lot of people don't realize that, and that's where I think your book is going to be very helpful for folks that don't really give it much thought. But there's a gift to be able to tell a good story, and to be able to tell it well, and to be able to tell it in a way that people receive it. Go ahead, Laura. I know you want to jump in there.
No, I agree with that. I had the opportunity to hear a professional storyteller many years ago, and I just thought she was the most amazing thing. I'd never seen anything quite like that. You were on the edge of your seat the whole time. You couldn't even tear your thoughts away if you wanted to. But I agree. I think some of us are not naturally good storytellers, and I think that this is something your book kind of speaks to, telling us how can we be better storytellers.
Right. And what?
Well, it was really interesting. I had a coach tell me a couple of years ago, because like you, Vivian, my dad was a great storyteller, and he only had grade 5 education. And my coach said, she says, we are born as natural storytellers, but as we go to school and we all, we want to raise our hand and meet our teachers' expectations and everything else, she said, we lose that natural creativity and we're trying to fit into whatever is expected of us. And so she said it's really very often where education works against us.
I agree.
And my dad was 87 when he passed away a few years ago, and there 3 days before he passed away in the hospital room, he was still entertaining the group of people visiting him with a story.
Oh,
it was really
amazing.
quite fascinating.
Absolutely. And those stories from long ago, they're a part of our history. And that used to be the only history we had, was through the stories.
That's true.
And my dad's the same, and he's just full of stories. And one I'm going to share real quick. My great aunt and uncle lived in Claytonville, Illinois, a town of about 60. It was a grain elevator. And they had 18, not 18, 12, 13 kids, and no indoor plumbing or anything. And my uncle was a farmhand, and he was out plowing the field outside of Claytonville, and he had pulled the tractor out into the road, and down from the road comes an old, I don't know, back in those days, it was an old car with the running boards, and there's two men standing on the running boards with Tommy machine guns. And it was, I want to say Al Capone, one of those big criminals in the back of the car, and he's got his tractor in the middle of the road, and there's these men with these machine guns telling him to get out of the road. and my dad's telling, you didn't know a tractor could go so fast. and when he tells it, it's 1,000 times better than what I would ever be able to tell. And it's quite funny, but it's just one of those stories you all remember. And it's the one story I'll remember about my great Uncle Roy. Is that story, and I can only imagine it.
You know, those stories, and it's fun because I grew up in a real small community in Midwest Canada, and all the people in this little community knew my dad, and they knew he was a great storyteller, and many of them said they could really tell his stories better than he could at this point. But they're kind of like the fish stories, you know, every time you tell them, that fish gets bigger and bigger.
Absolutely, absolutely. In the beginning of your book, you had well, I'm just going to read this little sentence because I thought it was profound. It said, recently I read an article in the Harvard Business Review about how stories properly told alter brain chemistry. Stories are the reason we buy particular things, donate to certain charities, and even fall in love. In fact, some might say the most important skill you will ever acquire is the ability to tell a good story. Isn't that the truth?
And it is. You know what? See, the ability to tell a good story, most people don't think of storytelling as really a skill. Mm-hmm. And that's why, Laura, as you referred to hearing a professional storyteller, and she had you on the edge of your seat the whole time, is because she had excelled in that skill. Mm-hmm. And it really is a skill to be a great storyteller.
Well, it is, and the ability to hold people's attention, and they listen, and they relate. I think a lot of times they relate, and that's what's good about comedians. Is comedians frequently will be telling you a story, and it's a story that people can relate to on some level. Mm-hmm. And then they slap you with that punchline, and you're going, oh, but you remember it, and it's there because comedians are good storytellers. And you know, even if you look at, I was thinking about this as well, in the political State of the Union addresses, and most of the presidents have been doing this for some time. They've been telling stories. In other words, they'll have somebody in the audience that had an experience, and they'll say, just like so-and-so here who was wounded in the war, blah, 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 and they'll be telling a little story about that. So they're telling a story that, whatever it is serving whatever agenda they need to, and then they could probably all use a little tip in storytelling. But still, it's telling a story that gets to a point that they need to make. And I think everybody does that in some fashion.
Well, they do, and you see it's through story that we connect, mm-hmm. and through story, people get to experience us, and we get to experience others. And mm-hmm. when we experience, we remember.
Right.
And that's what the key is. And so, yes, it's the best thing they can do is tell a story as part of their address or wherever we are, to be able to tell a story, because that is a way of remembering one another.
Exactly. And sometimes you remember a person by the story they've told. That may be the one thing you remember about someone is the story they have shared. because
Absolutely.
that's the connection. So yes, I think it's great. Do you remember the story in the book that you tell about Einstein and the train?
Oh, I love that
Yeah.
one. I
Yes,
love
I
that
do.
one.
And losing the tickets. Do you think you could share it with us? Because I think it's a great story.
Oh, sure, I will. Yes.
Cool, thanks.
Well, the story is told of Dr. Einstein, who boarded a train from Philadelphia. And back in those days, you know how the conductor would come by and punch the ticket.
Yes.
Well, he got up to Einstein, and Dr. Einstein could not find his ticket anywhere. He checked his jacket pocket, no ticket. He checked his trousers, no ticket. He checked his briefcase, still no ticket. And the conductor said, Dr. Einstein, you know what? Don't worry about this. We know who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And he was assured that he had a ticket, and so the conductor kept going. And as he got to the end of the train car, he happened to turn around, and there's Dr. Einstein on his knees, looking under his seat for the ticket. And the conductor came racing back, and he says, Dr. Einstein. He said, don't worry about it. We know who you are. And Dr. Einstein stood up on his feet, and he said, son, I too know who I am. What I don't know is where I'm going.
I love that story. I love that story. And you told it very well.
I think so many of us can relate to it. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's a relatable story. It is such a relatable story. That's why I love it. Wow. Yeah. Well, there's so many important parts of a story, and I think you break it down, which I really appreciate. You have, I think it was 3 different segments. I've got to get through my notes here. You have breakthrough for secrets. That was number 2. Number 1 was trusting your own story, and you break it for the reader who can look at this. And I think, that was when I get back to that breakthrough number 1, trusting your own story. A lot of it is you have to believe yourself. If you're telling the story, you have to believe yourself. And so you have to trust that you believe the story you're telling. And I did want to ask you this. I'm kind of rattling on here. You can shut me up any minute, Linda.
You're doing fine.
But there's this thing called poetic license, embellishment. And I know as we go, sometimes we find that different sentences maybe work. But if we're telling the same story over and over again because it's a part of our being and we're getting a good response from people and we like the story, there's a what's the word? An embellishment perhaps with certain verbs, like the fish was bigger than we thought, or maybe more colorful, or what have you. Do you find that a lot, and is that okay?
You know what? It always depends on what kind of group you're talking to and so forth. And if you're talking to sometimes the same group, say you've got a class. Mm-hmm. And it's you're teaching over a period of time, and it's the same group. Sometimes it can also be used as a teaching tool because you come in and you share this aspect, but you didn't tell them about these details, and perhaps you didn't tell them about this. Mm-hmm. Now, the embellishment, of course, that's often used with catching more interest and sometimes humor, and I think it's okay to use some. I mean, you don't want to get to the place to exaggerate so that, it's actually not true.
Right.
Unless you're using that as an example or, perhaps using it for humor and people know you're joking about it.
That's
so
true.
I think there's a time and place for it.
That's true. And a lot of times it's relative because the fish you might have been that big. But to somebody else who fishes all the time, it's not such a big deal. It's not such a big,
Yeah.
So it's kind of a relative
Exactly.
thing too, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think the whole thing is, you're right. It has to be believable. And that was part of your breakthrough secret number 1. You got to be able to trust your story, because if it's not true, you're going to be telling it differently so many times that it won't ring true to people who've heard it more than once too.
And that's part of it. Trusting in your own story, is huge, because that's the foundation. We have to own our story. And often there's painful events or painful circumstances, and if we haven't addressed that pain, then we aren't owning that part of our story.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a time and place for it. It's okay. Then share the parts that you do own, and hopefully in time you will receive healing enough that you can share those painful things. I mean, I shared briefly at the beginning, my very painful story of losing my little brother.
Yes.
I told bits and pieces here and there, but it really wasn't until I came to complete healing and worked with my coach. And she had told me one day, she said, and she was very, very firm with me, and she said, I have traveled the world, and I have heard all kinds of stories, and she was a great storyteller. She says, but she said, until you are able to tell your story with the power that it's worth, it will fade in like any other story. But she said, I have never heard a story on self-forgiveness like yours, and you need to tell it with the power it's worth. And I thought, wow. I mean, she really exhorted me, and I didn't understand really fully what she meant until I came to that place of completely owning my story.
That is profound. And with that, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back with more of our visit with Linda Olson and talking about stories. Stay tuned.
Hello, I am His Majesty the Soul, King of Mauritius, and I invite you to help me build the world's planetary egg, an ecological geophysical galleon. It's approximately 180 acres, and it is home to 3,000 researchers from around the world. It is the world's first sovereign, planetary, independent jurisdiction that has the capability of advancing and progressing and fast-tracking every aspect of innovation, helping us redefine what it means to be human in a new world. So check out our website. It's www.mauricii.com, MORACEAE.com. I look forward to seeing you, and please contribute, donate to the GoFundMe page. I look forward to meeting you, and let's build the planetary egg. Thank you.
Welcome back to The Broad Perspective on the Broad Perspective Network. I'm Vivian Kamori.
And I'm Laura Felice.
And we're visiting with Linda Olson, who's author of the book, Your Story Matters. And she is, this is her fourth book. This is a very, very interesting book, and it's very easy to read, I have to say. It's very well written. For me, it's easy to go back it's done in sections, and so you're easy. If there's something in particular that rings to you that you need to focus on or that you want to reread, it's easy to go back and find it. And
it is very easy to read, and I love the fact that there were so many stories in there, not just because they were great stories, but they're examples of how to tell them.
Oh, thank you.
Exactly, and I'm sure that was your objective.
Yes, it was. I'm glad we met that one.
Yes, you did indeed. You did indeed. One of the notes I made here is that, let's see here, a basic story is made up of 25% introduction, 50% conflict, and 25% resolution. The introduction and resolution bookend the conflict. If you're telling the briefest of stories, for example, allow one statement for your introduction, 3 statements to build on the conflict, and 1 statement for the resolution. Simply put, the simple story guidelines look like this: introduction, conflict, 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 resolution, story equals story. I thought that, it's kind of like Laura and I are in Toastmasters. I'm sure you're familiar with Toastmasters, Linda.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And they do the same thing with public speaking. You have your introduction, you have your the body of your speech, and you have your conclusion,
the resolution or the closing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of similar to that. And I think we do that naturally in our stories. We start out sharing the opening, and then we've got the body of the story, and then we've got the conclusion of the story. But the way you said that, I like that. 25%, 50%, 25%. I don't think any of us are really conscious of that unless we're doing it publicly and we're trying to outline our story that we're going to be telling in front of a bunch of people. Most of the time it's just very fluid and we just tell our story. But
well, it is, and you're right. And that is just a basic guideline, but it's the framework of story where often where we mess up is that we share too many details, because the details are important to me. I think they should be important to you. And so I can get caught up sharing the details, and our listener will often lose interest in the details because they don't really care about the details, just get to the point.
Right.
And then it becomes too long. And today, because our attention span is so short, they said, my coach used to tell us, any great story should be no longer than 2 minutes.
Yep.
2 minutes to be told well. And the best thing we can do is just leave out a lot of the details.
You're absolutely right. And my mother always said the genius lies in brevity. And I think you are absolutely right. In fact, one of the quotes that I extrapolated from your book, it says, be a respecter of time. Our calendars are full, our schedules are packed, our to-do lists are endless. Your presentation must be concise, to the point, and easy to understand. Time yourself when you tell your story. Keep it in your hip pocket, a 30-minute version, a 10-minute version, and a 2-minute version. I thought that was awesome. And you're right, be respectful of people's time. And that's so awesome. And I think that of anything in your book, that is one of the most important points, at least to me. I think that's extremely valuable. Extremely valuable.
Well, when we tell story, it's kind of like the attention goes from you to me. But when I tell story, there needs to, particularly if I'm teaching or something, there's a purpose behind every story. And so, that story tells a point. And I want that point to be about you, not about me.
Right.
And when we get caught up in too many details and aren't respecting somebody else's time, then it kind of turns and becomes about me. And it really, if I want to connect with you, it needs to be about you.
Right. Or something that I know you can relate to. I'm sharing this story because I think it's something you would benefit from, or that you would learn from, or you would make us more connected. There's usually, when we're sharing a story, there's usually a reason for it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
it is, just that whole idea of connection that you mentioned, that is one of the greatest benefits of story. It's how we connect. It's the same thing with that story framework with conflict. I mean, have you ever watched a movie without conflict?
No, that's true. There's always conflict. Yeah, that's true.
There's no point.
Yeah, they go from conflict. I mean, often they'll it just hit you with conflict, and then often they'll go back and they'll kind of share how that person came to that place, and then they take you on this roller coaster and go up and down, and finally at the end, hopefully, that conflict is resolved. Sometimes it isn't, because they leave it open-ended because they just want you to think about this. But they carry us through the movie with conflict.
Right.
And with emotional pain. And that's the same thing. That's just another form of story. It's the same thing we can do in our short stories. We connect through conflict because everybody understands pain. Even though their circumstances may be totally different, they still relate to pain. So that's how we connect.
You're absolutely right. And that's what we want. We want that connection with another individual, because another one of the quotes that you used in the book that I think most of our listeners are probably familiar with, but it bears reiterating, especially in the context of what we're talking about. And it was a quote by Maya Angelou. Said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel." And that's the objective of telling our story.
I've heard that quote before, and it's very true. The important things that I remember in my life are exactly have to do with people that made me feel good.
Exactly.
Made me feel,
And that's probably why you remember your storyteller experience, Laura, is because that woman made you feel a certain way. It was more so than just the story itself. It's how it made you feel. So I think that's a very good point, Linda, that you included that in your book, and you talk about that. Is that's all everybody wants, is they want to feel what you're talking about.
Yes. I don't know whether I I put in the quote or not. I've used it a lot in my training, but research tells us that we only remember 7% of what we hear, 23% of what we see, and 70% of what we experience.
Absolutely.
And that's what stories are all about. They're about experience. Yes.
And it's that experience in the heart, because well, here on the Broad Perspective, we've talked about this a lot with interviewing a lot of scientists and medical doctors and so on and so forth, how powerful that heart energy is, and how it's much more powerful, and it's measurable. It is measurable than the brain. The brain auric field of the brain goes out about 10 feet, and the heart goes out beyond 60 feet. It's measurable, so that heart energy that you're trying to connect with is extremely powerful.
Wow, that's very interesting. Yes.
Yeah, and you can look up the Heart Math Institute. Though there's a lot of statistics out there, but or listen to the Broad Perspective, some of our other shows.
Sounds great.
Because we've had a couple of neurologists have addressed that, so it's an interesting thing, but it fits right into what you're talking about, how you make people feel. Yeah, with your story. Let's see. Let me get through my notes here. One of the things that you mentioned, you should always begin with gratitude. Talking about beginning. Now, it might be in your own heart, and doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to say, I'm grateful to tell you the story, because if it's in common conversation, you're not going to say, oh, thank you for letting me talk about this. But I think a grateful heart goes a long way. Why do you think that's important?
Well, you know what? I believe gratitude is something that can allow us to rise above a lot of our pain. I've done a lot of training on gratitude, and I would actually do a little exercise, and I would ask whoever was in my class to actually write down 10 things a day that they're grateful for. And, 5 days a week, and say 4 weeks in a month, so forth. That would be like 200 things in 5 months. They could have over 1,000 personal things that they are grateful for. Well, one lady who was going through a particularly difficult time, both her mother and her mother-in-law were on their deathbed at the same time.
Oh, boy.
And she said, I would wake up, and she said, I didn't write 50 things a week. She said the only way I was able to make it through was I would get up, sit up in bed, have my note paper there, and I would write 50 things a day I was grateful for, and that allowed me to make it through that difficult season in my life.
Wow.
And so very often, we may not think about those kind of things, but it's so easy to get caught up in the negative. And once we start thinking negative, it's just a downhill spiral from there.
Yep.
And to turn that around can be very difficult. But if we practice gratitude on a daily or regular basis, it is amazing the different perspective that we can have in life. And I really make a part of practicing that on a daily or at least a weekly basis. And I know it has made a big difference for me.
Well, I think it makes a difference for all of us, and I think it's a good reminder. I'm glad you included it in your book, because I think sometimes, like you said earlier, we all get so busy, we get caught up in our day-to-day life, and we get caught up in our own stories and our own drama, which sometimes is negative, and we don't take the time to stop and think about the things we should be grateful for. And there's a lot. There's a lot.
Absolutely.
Every single minute of every single day, there's so much. Go ahead, Laura. Were you going to throw something in there?
No, I just agree with you. Sometimes it's very hard not to. It's very difficult sometimes to see the things that we are grateful for. You kind of have to dig, but once you get started, it does get easier. It's like a muscle you have to exercise.
Well, there you go.
Well, and as you do it, it's amazing how. I know, at least for myself, how I would start what were bigger things. I'd start with kind of bigger things that I was grateful for and so forth. And then I start beginning to notice a lot of detail in just, just small things. And really in my heart, whether I verbalized it or not, like you said, I just expressed it in my heart. And, it can be the simplest thing, the things that we often take for granted every day or aren't grateful for until we're without them, like hot water or internet or electricity or whatever it may be.
Yes.
Yes, it has made a big difference in allowing me to just appreciate the little things.
Well, and that's very important. Well, every bit of it's important, but I think gratitude should be at the top of the list because I think that it's so easy, like we said earlier, just to be on automatic pilot, and we just need to stop and pause and reflect. And I think it does make a big difference. We're going to take another break because I want to come back. There's some very, very interesting points in this book that I hope people will run out and get it just for this reason because they're very thought-provoking and stimulating, quite honestly. So we're going to be back in just a moment and talk to Linda about all of that. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
The 12th hour.
A show literally about everything.
Everything.
A candid discussion between friends about their different perspectives on what they think may be going on.
Or what is not going on.
With so many different areas of information being given out, we attempt to put together the puzzle pieces to create the broad perspective of the whole picture.
Welcome back to The Broad Perspective on the Broad Perspective Network. I'm Vivian Kamori.
And I'm Laura Felice.
And we're continuing our discussion with Linda Olson, author of the book Your Story Matters. And it's how to be a good storyteller. And it is very, very, very interesting. It's an easy book to read, and it's full of thought-provoking information. One thing in particular that I liked is there is a whole section on who am I. But you know what? I'm going to come back to that because I just remembered. I don't want to forget to do this. Tell people how they can get your book.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for your kind words. The book, Your Story Matters, is on Amazon. That'd be the best place to get it. It's the subtitle is 3 Breakthrough Secrets to Stories That Transform. And right now, I actually have it on Amazon, the digital copy. It's only 99 cents that you can download it. And I just ask if you would be so kind, if you found the book interesting, to just take a few minutes and write a review. That would be very helpful. In a few weeks, the physical copy will be up on Amazon, but that would be the best place to get it.
Okay, so go to Amazon. And for 99 cents right now, that's the best 99 cents you'll spend today. I guarantee you.
It's a great book.
Yeah.
You will learn so much.
Absolutely. Just do it. And then go to page 88 because there's a section called Who Am I? Which the Broad Perspective, our regular listeners know that that's one of our soapboxes that we stand on. Know thyself, know who you are. And Linda does such a good job in outlining ways that we can actually get to know ourselves a little better because on this section, she lists a whole lot of attributes or adjectives, if you will, on things that may or may not pertain to us. But as you look through there, you can read these words and you go, oh, yeah, I am good at that. Oh, yeah, that is a strong point. Oh, that one, not so much. Oh, yeah, maybe I need to work on that a little bit. And I honestly think even if you looked at that on a regular basis, you would learn a lot about yourself, and you could actually do a lot of self-improvement, I think.
I agree with that statement. It's a great guide for many reasons, not just storytelling. It's one of those bonus. It's like a bonus. But wait, there's more.
Well, and part of the reason I put it in there is for just even as a reminder to remember what our strengths are. Because so often when we get discouraged, we forget who we are And then we start operating and functioning out of our weaknesses. And of course, that just becomes a downhill spiral until we get a hold of this and say, wait a minute, that's not who I am. Why am I reacting or responding that way? This is who I am, and bounce back to our strengths. So it's really set up as a checklist for many different reasons, but that is one important one to keep in mind. This is who I am, or like you said, this is where I can grow in and become that person that I really want to be.
Right. And maybe even take like one of those words on a regular basis and say, this is what I'm going to be today, compassionate. This is the word I want to focus on today, and I'm going to exercise compassion in all my dealings, or something like that. Just one word, one adjective that would help your focus for that day. I just thought it was a really great section and something that everybody could benefit from.
Oh, thank you, and that's a great way to use it. Just break it down, one at a time to take a look at. Yes.
Right, exactly. And then towards the end of the book, you ask the question, what do you really offer? You see, we might think that some of our stories are so profound to us, but they might be profound to us alone, and they're really not interesting to anybody else. Or, in some cases, people that know us are tired of us telling them. They're tired of us. They're tired of us telling that story. It's like, okay, enough already. So I think asking yourself that question, besides the attributes, also say, what do I really offer? And I think that's another point for self-reflection. Go ahead, Linda.
Yes, thank you. And it's the difference between what I am offering and what do I really want to offer. Because is it about meeting somebody else's needs? This is where we go back to our purpose in storytelling. Is it about my needs? Do I have a need for, it might be even as simple as need for attention right now, or am I really focused on what the other person needs and how this story can help connect and relate to their need?
Right.
And yes, so good question to ask. What am I really offering?
Yes, exactly. And I think that's probably another one of those questions that we should ask ourselves on a regular basis. What am I really offering? Is it constructive or destructive?
Yes.
Yeah. And what's the benefit to whom? Is it to us for being able to tell the story and bloviate all the time? Or is it from us because we're actually telling it to assist someone else or a story that they can relate to? We really do need to I think we need to ask ourselves that question probably more than anything else.
Well, and you know what? It isn't just with storytelling. I mean, that just works all the time. And
Yes.
a lot of times, I think I have this story in the book where I talked about it was in a courtyard in Italy, and a priest came across, and these two men were working so hard. Their shoulders were bent and their muscles strained and sweat pouring down their face. And the priest came to the one man and he said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm chiseling stone." And he walked across over to the other man and he said, "My son." He said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm building a cathedral." Two men doing exactly the same thing, but they had a whole different vision.
Right.
And in the same way, it's kind of like, what are we really offering? Is it just, what we think is this product, or are we offering something much bigger? We're offering healing. We're offering, help in a whole nother area. And it's not just about fixing this one thing. It's, we're offering warmth, we're offering gratitude, we're offering encouragement in some of the bigger things. And if we keep our perspective on that, it will make all the difference.
Absolutely. I like that. It's, what do you want the end result to be? What do you want the end result of your story to be? Not necessarily the ending of the story, but what do you want the result to be? What do you really want to convey? What are you really trying to convey to your listener?
What's the message?
What's the message? Yeah.
Yes, I had a speaker trainer once tell me, he said, it's not what you give them, it's what they leave with that matters.
Ah.
See, so often we think, I really had to think that through. So often we think our audience receives and walks away with what we tell them. But everybody's at a different place in their life, and different things will instill or trigger different things for them. So it's like, okay, what are they really leaving with?
Right. Right.
Yes.
Exactly. Exactly. And there's never any guarantees what a person's going to take away from anything you say. We don't know what a person's going to take away from this show. They may take away the music, but they may take away certain aspects of the content, and everybody is going to take away something different. It really that's something that I've learned over time. And it's surprising. It's surprising what people will say or say, "Oh man, I got so much from that show, and I got thus and such," and I'm like, I don't even remember talking about that. But
Exactly. Yes.
But it is something that they took away that's surprising, because everybody again has something different that they.
And we're all triggered by different things.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So
and we're all at different places in our life.
Yes.
We could hear the same thing, and a year later, say something was taped, or like one of your shows, go back and listen to the show a year later. Well, we'll pick up something entirely different because we're at a different place in our life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. What do you say, Linda, to the person who might say to you, "Oh, I don't have any stories. I don't have any stories. I don't have anything to say." What would you say to them?
You know what? I've had many people come and tell me that.
Wow.
And so I just turn around and I ask them, I say, well, tell me a little bit about yourself. And I remember a particular lady who told me that, and it turned out at the time she was going through a horrific divorce. And, was so caught up in her pain and protecting her young children and so forth, and where she was going to move and how she was going to provide, and on it goes. And I looked at her and I said, you know what? You may not be ready to tell your story, but you really have a very powerful story. And when you are ready, I'll be more than happy to work with you.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Because everybody does have a story, but like I said, because so often we get stuck in our pain that we think we don't have story, or are embarrassed to tell it, or don't know how to tell it. See, and the other thing is, we think, my story, it's no big deal. Lots of people have gone through divorce, and so why would I want to tell that? Well, the thing is, because a lot of people have gone through it, they identify with the pain. They just want to know, when you've gotten to the resolution of your story, how did you do it? Because that will give me hope and encouragement to know that I can keep going. And you know what? I'll get to the other side some point too.
Right. Exactly. You've said something relatable. You have incorporated something relatable that the listener can connect with.
Yes, and it doesn't have to be something big like that. See, a lot of people think, unless I have this big story that's kind of extraordinary, it doesn't count. No. You know what? People relate to the everyday things in life.
Exactly.
It can be, it can be just something simple, and forgetting our cell phone at home, and how did we manage all day without our cell phone? And it's those little conflicts here and there. They connect with that because it happens to them too.
Exactly. It's kind of like the Einstein story. Who of us
Yes.
cannot relate to forgetting where we're headed?
Yeah, I do that just going into the bedroom sometimes. And I think, why did I get here?
Exactly. We do it all the time. And see, I think that's what's also so good about that particular story is that we tend to, I suppose you would say, idolize Einstein, or we certainly look up to him, and it shows that he's human too. that he also has challenges just like the rest of us that we can all relate to. And that's what's so precious about that story, I think, is that it really connects.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And we laugh because we're laughing with it. You know, we're not laughing at him. We laugh
Exactly.
because we're laughing with it because we
all
can
been there.
identify and relate to it. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, most definitely. Most definitely. Well, there's so much benefit to all of it, really. The other thing I want to mention is that towards the back of the book you have worksheets in there. Now, I will admit I didn't spend a lot of time with them because I just didn't have the time to devote to it. But I thought for our listeners who are seriously thinking about getting this book, which I still strongly suggest, I think that you would benefit from taking a look at those worksheets. For that person that says, I don't have a story, I don't know, I don't know what to do, I don't know how to tell, all that kind of stuff. I think that it's important, very important for a person to take a look at those worksheets and see how they can perhaps work through those or see if there's a benefit for them.
Well, thank you. You know what? And I put them in there because it is for those that may not think they have a story. It's also for those people that know they have a story and they want to become more effective in their story, or perhaps learn to use their story to attract more clients in their business, or even relating just to people in the community. And
Right.
so a few things I want to mention, because I always look at, what can I contribute? How can I give? How can I encourage people with their storytelling? And I offer a free consultation. You can just go on my website at wealththroughstories.com, and anybody can sign up for a free consultation. I'd be happy to talk with you. The other thing is, twice a year I do a 3-day retreat. I call it Wealth Through Stories Live, and it's all about storytelling and embracing our story. It's really a fun time because it's very interactive. It's fun. It's near the beach at Carlsbad, just north of San Diego. Yes. And in the back of the book, I don't want you to miss this, because in the back of the book, I put a $100 coupon towards that retreat.
Wow.
And so right now, you can actually, with that $100 coupon, just download the book for 99 cents and tell me you have that $100 coupon, and you can go on my website again, wealththroughstories.com, to the Story Retreat page and sign up for $97.
Oh my gosh, what a deal.
Yeah, for
That is a great
three-day
deal.
retreat. It's a fabulous time. We just have so much fun. Like I said, very interactive. You're not sitting there taking notes the whole time. We're doing fun exercises. You will actually leave with at least 5 personal stories that you can use every day in business, relating to friends, people in the community, whatever it is.
Wow. Who wouldn't like that? Awesome. That is great. We're going to take another break. This one we'll be back with our final session with Linda Olson here, and we want you to stay tuned because this has been very, very interesting. We'll be right back with more of the Broad Perspective.
BPN. Join the awakening.
The Broad Perspective Network is a portal designed to reveal a new perspective and reality to those who wish to know the truth about the world we live in and our role in it.
BPN. See beyond the illusion.
Welcome back to the Broad Perspective on the Broad Perspective Network. This is Vivian Kamori.
And I'm Laura Felice.
And we're continuing our discussion with Linda Olson, author of the book Your Story Matters. And this has been such a good interview because I think that it might stimulate people to really focus on their stories and think about what stories are important to them, what stories they want to share, what stories maybe they haven't told that they'd like to share. And I hope that it's been motivational for that reason. Linda, I'm going to take this moment and reiterate that you can get your book on Amazon. Look it up. Right now you can get the digital copy for 99 cents. It'll be out in hardback within a few weeks from the time of this recording. And also you have a website, wealththroughstories.com. Wealth, WEALTH, through stories.com. I think that there is so much in value here. Your third area is that you talk about. You break it down into 3 sections: breakthrough secrets, and the third one you talk about vulnerability, and that's something we haven't talked about yet. And I think that personally, I think people can relate to your vulnerability, but I think we shouldn't be afraid of it, but we are. Would you like to speak to that, please?
Oh, yes, I'd be happy to. It's kind of interesting because it's hard for almost all of us to be vulnerable. It certainly has been for me. I think it's why it took me so long to really be able to own my story, my big story, and to tell it. Mm-hmm. Because, when we're vulnerable, we always risk getting hurt. And mm-hmm. nobody wants to get hurt. Mm-hmm. But there's something that happens, and I really believe vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness.
Oh.
And there's something that happens when we share on a vulnerable basis. It's like it gives someone else permission to be vulnerable as well. Because it's like we open ourselves up and we let somebody in on a deeper level, and then it's like, oh, okay, well then I can share on that level too.
Right.
And it's amazing what happens. It's like taking people to a whole different level of trust when we can do that. Some people they're amazing at it, mm-hmm. and they just very naturally are very vulnerable. But in this day and age, when so many people have been hurt by many, many different circumstances and situations, the barriers go up, and it's difficult to trust. And so we have to earn that trust, and we can do that through our stories. But if we want to take people to a deeper trust, it will mean being vulnerable with them.
Right. And you're right. And that is important. It's difficult. It is valuable. But I think it also, once again, adds to that connection. Just like you were saying, I think it makes a person more readily willing to listen because we all have vulnerabilities. And sometimes we don't recognize that everybody else does too. And we're afraid of them. I think to vulnerabilities and not speak to them is connected to fear. We're so afraid. We're so afraid that other people don't have those and that it makes us seem weak, when the reality is it actually makes us seem real.
Exactly. Yes, well said.
Yeah, and that the reality is what I think we all should be striving for, is just being real and making sure everybody's okay with being real. Because I could get on my soapbox. I think that's what's wrong with the world. We're so afraid to be real. We're so afraid to be real.
There's nothing people want to hear more and see more than that authenticity, mm-hmm. because they want to know you're real. Mm-hmm. That's why when somebody comes, from perhaps a very professional place, mm-hmm. or, people can't relate to that. They can relate to the everyday conflict, mm-hmm. but they can't relate when somebody appears that they have it all together. We know that they really don't, but they're at least appearing like they do.
Right.
And it's like, well, how do we connect with that?
Right.
Because they look like they're perfect, and I'm far from perfect.
we do that all the time. And I'm reminded of someone, I want to say it was Quincy Jones, because he's been very, very vocal lately, sitting at a table at an awards dinner with a bunch of, I'm going to say America's top models, some of the most beautiful people in the world. And he said all he could hear in the conversation was what was wrong with each of them. Not against each other, but each one saying about their own insecurities. So like my cheeks are too fat, or my ears are too big, or some sort of self-deprecation that each one of them was speaking to sincerely. They were sincerely ripping them, not ripping each other, just...
Yes. But discounting themselves.
Yes.
Exactly.
Looking at their negative traits and physical conditions and discounting themselves. It's really very sad. But, nobody is as critical of themselves as they are.
Exactly. And here we are thinking, if we were at that table, we would be so intimidated. Oh my gosh, I'm so less than them. I'm so not enough. I'm so not beautiful, or what have you. And here they are feeling that same way about themselves. So I thought that was a very, very, very enlightening story. It's a story. It's a story that this man told. Yeah, it was a story. And you know what? It made me feel better about myself. It did. It did. It's like, okay. So I've got these faults too, but maybe I'm okay just like they're okay,
Yes. And see, we have to give ourselves permission. We're waiting for everybody else to, and often give other people the power to say who we are. See, this is back to who am I.
Right.
We give somebody else the power to say, it's like if we get compliments or they say nice things or tell us how beautiful we are, then we must be beautiful. But if all of a sudden over a period of time we're not hearing that,
right.
Well, what's wrong with me? I must not be, and all the negative stuff comes out. Yeah. And instead, when we decide who we are, regardless of how other people respond or not, that's when we will experience that new freedom.
Exactly. And there you go. And we want everybody to go on that walk with us. And when we project ourselves as being that way, as confident and real, then other people pick up on that, and they'll feel it's okay to be real as well. And I think that's why this is also powerful. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants to be real. We don't want to be having to have this facade that we're constantly fed in the media that we have to be, that we have to all be something different. And I think that's the problem. I think that boils down to everything and every malady in this whole country, if not the world, is that we're constantly spoon-fed that we need to be something different than we are.
Yes, very much so. And that's why, particular people who are in the media all the time, they face so much criticism and so many attacks, and it's a very, very difficult position to be, because it's got to be extremely difficult to just be themselves.
Exactly. So, and I think that's why your book is so important for people, is because you do stress that. You stress the ability to be real, and you stress the importance of knowing who you really are, and asking those questions of who am I and how can I project that in my stories? How can people feel that and connect that with me? And that's why this is so valuable for people to understand that, and people to take that chance, tell their story in a way that will connect with people. And I really thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Very welcome.
And Linda, we're out of time, so is there one thing you want to, or just about out of time, we have about 1 minute left, is there something that you would like us to know that maybe we haven't touched on, or that you want to reiterate that's important for our listeners to know?
Well, I think about one of my favorite quotes is by Brene Brown. She says, loving ourselves and embracing our story is the most courageous thing we could ever do. And I just encourage everybody, all of our listeners, to just take a look at your story and know that there are many parts of your story where you can use that story to help someone else. And everybody wants to make a difference, so I encourage you to be willing to take a look at that.
Beautiful. I love that. And that was Brene Brown?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Well,
This has been a lot of fun. We want to remind people
to be able to go to your website, wealththroughstories.com, go on to Amazon, order the book, Your Story Matters.
you can get the 99-cent digital copy right now, or you can get the hard copy later. Either way, and you've got a workshop coming up. In the meantime, we are just very grateful for your time today, Linda. Thank you so much for spending it with us here on The Broad Perspective.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It was my pleasure. I truly enjoyed it.
And we want to encourage our listeners to join us same time, same place next week with Our Perspective. Join us and broaden yours. Thanks for listening.
We hope you've enjoyed today's show. To keep programs like this and other programs on the Broad Perspective Network, go to thebroadperspective.com and click the donate button. We truly appreciate your support.